Hi everyone, welcome to the 8th unit in Run to Bronze. We're going to talk about being the expert and a three-way call. So let's get into it. We're going to look at, these are the things that we're going to cover. Why are three-way calls so important? We're going to look at the ABCs of the three-way call, how to invite someone to come to that three-way call. How do you actually edify? How to set the call up when you have everybody present. What happens during the call? What are the rules that we need to know? And as an associate, what's our role as an associate and what's our role as an expert? So let's talk about why are three-way calls so important? Well, they serve for a number of things. They serve to provide validation. That's probably one of their most important roles. Validation for that person that what you've told them is actually true. And it gives them an additional outside perspective that you are not going to be able to convey. It's really important to have a different voice in the conversation, no matter how skilled you are at this, no matter how much you know, no matter how much you could actually tell that person something, they need to hear it from someone else. It disconnects us from this sales role of being the only person that they communicate with. And you have to also understand that if you're someone who works in the counter behind the counter in CVS, for example, all right, your friend is not going to see you as a redox expert. So it would be ridiculous to start spouting biochemistry to them when they're going to look at you and say, well, what do you know? Same would go for someone who's an architect, for example. Suddenly for them to start talking biochemistry with their friends would also seem weird. So get that connection with someone else who can take that role. One of the other things that the purpose of the three-way provides is to expand the vision of the person that you're sharing with. You want them to see that there is a larger piece to this message than simply what they've heard so far. We want to also answer their objections on there in a way that feels comfortable to them. We also want to make sure that we can open up this vision of the possibility of having a conversation about what if they could provide themselves with some additional form of income. What is this business possibility for them? And the other part is that you also learn as you are listening, and that is an important piece of what a three-way does for all of us, especially at the beginning when we're not familiar with them or you don't have a lot of experience. You want to actually get on a lot of calls and learn. Now, what are the things that three-way calls should not be? Well, they definitely should not be a sales job. We do not want to make anybody feel that, and I know that none of us love to be sold, right? That just isn't how we are as human beings. So it's not a goal to actually get them to pull out their credit card as fast as possible and sign up and purchase product. What we should be doing is creating a really comfortable environment for someone so that at the end of that experience of the three-way, the one thing that we would love to hear them say is, wow, that was really helpful. I'm so glad that I spoke to that person. Now, what else do three-way calls do? Well, they do a couple of things. They train you. If you're not familiar with three-way calls, it's how we all start in this business, right? Getting on a call and receiving on-the-job training. You can do all the reading you want in the world, but if you actually don't get to hear what happens on a three-way call, it's really hard to do those both comfortably or effectively and achieve the goals that you need with them. So on-the-job training, right? Get on those calls and pay attention and listen carefully to what are the things that are covered. They are also going to train your guest, and you may think that that's an odd statement, but it actually isn't. Think about the fact that this is a business of duplication. So in fact, where does duplication begin? It begins from the very first moment that you connect to somebody and introduce yourself. All right, in the process of listening to them and asking questions, you're already training them in how to connect with other people if they choose to do this business. It's in every step of the way a process of showing them both the process that we go through and the system that we have in order to do that. Now, if at the end of that whole process they become one of your associates who's gung-ho for the business and they turn around and say to you, well, how do I do this? What are you able to say? If you've been duplicating that process and you've been taking them through and training them from the first moment that you connected with them, what you're going to be able to say is, well, how did I share this this information with you. They'll think back and they'll say, well, you asked me some questions about myself and you suggested there was something that I could look at. Oh yeah, you sent me a video. Well, I can do that. What do we do then? Well, I got on and I spoke to somebody else who answered my questions. Right? So you're already showing them how to do it. It makes it comfortable. Remember that even in that process, people are always quietly thinking in the back of the mind, if they are interested in the business, well, how do I do this business? What do I do, and do I want to do it? Those are the three things that they're asking themselves. So it's really important that we show them a system that becomes comfortable. Now, if you're not using three ways, it's really hard to duplicate out a system that would involve that, because what would happen? You've been the sole conversation point for that person. You've answered all their questions, you've dealt with their objections, you've directed them to the science, you've done whatever it is you needed to do, you've signed them up, and then they get going. Well, they haven't seen how this system duplicates. So what are they going to duplicate? They're going to think that they have to duplicate being an expert in every aspect of this business and doing the business on their own. And what do we talk about? We talk about the fact that this business is something that you do for yourself, but you're not on your own. Now, what is the structure of the three-way? That ABC, as we call it. A is the advisor. That is your expert, right? Your upline, your team person, your crossline. It could include that downline person. It does not have to be an upline. Someone else who has a story that you want them to share. B is you. That's the bridge. You are the bridge between these two people who don't know each other. And C is your customer. That could be your friend, the prospect, somebody that you've just recently met. Your goal is to bring together these two people and to transfer the trust that you have with this customer so that they can have trust in a reason to share and learn from the advisor or the expert. You want them to be able to say yes to that call. Now, how you invite to the three-way call, the way you invite, the phrases that you use, and also the posture as you invite will matter. Now, as you frame the how do I want to get this person to come to a call and what value am I going to show them, I want you to think about first off, well, what's in it for them? If you can identify what would be in it for them and why the call would have a value, then you'll be able to get them to say yes, and you're going to transfer that trust. So it's important not to focus on, well, I really want to get them in there because I want to get them signed up. So think about what's in it for them. Now, as you look at the two expressions of those women on the screen there, one is very inviting, right? She's really friendly, and think about that's that posture piece. But the other one, she's probably a little suspect there. Wouldn't that make you feel a little bit on edge about what am I being invited to? So I just want to leave you with that thought about don't be the suspect to your prospect. Now, new associates often find this invitation piece to the three-way pretty difficult. It's not the most comfortable thing. It's not something that is absolutely natural for any of us. So it is something that becomes a learned skill. And often when we're new at it, because we're uncomfortable, we deliver that information in a way that really communicates a lack of comfort. So what happens is we very often get a rejection rate, maybe a much higher rejection rate to getting to a three-way than someone who's more experienced. How often do I hear, well, I'm asking everybody, but, nobody wants to get on a three-way call. I just can't get them there. They'll all tell me, no, I don't need to speak to anyone. And what that really means is that you aren't comfortable in a way that successfully transfers the trust between your customer to why they would actually be connected to that expert. Now, if you're just simply coming out without thinking about what's in it for them and just very cleanly and with not much filtering going on, just saying, do you want to talk to my friend who's a doctor? She can answer all your questions. You might think that that's an absolute reason why a lot of people might say, oh yeah, absolutely, I want to get on the call and talk to a doctor about all my questions. I will tell you that actually that doesn't turn out to be true. Most people, I think, don't necessarily think that they have questions. I mean, if somebody said to me, do you have any questions about most things? I'm probably going to go, no, not really, because I'm one of those people that likes to listen I actually like to listen to what other people's objections are, because in a way it tells me, is that an objection for me? And maybe I come up with the things that I realize truly are the questions that I want to ask. But I think that the overall mindset probably is that, well, if I get into this call to ask questions that I'm not really certain that I have, am I able to get out of it comfortably? Does it not feel a bit like the lion's den and the sales piece? Now, if you certainly just say to somebody, hey, do you want to get on a three-way call? I'm going to take a bet with every single one of you on the call today that never in the history of humanity have you ever had someone say to you, oh, yeah, I absolutely want to do a three-way call. I thought you'd never ask. That doesn't happen, right? I can tell you now, don't ever ask somebody, do they want to be on a three-way call? Absolutely every one of us is going to tell you no. So what you do is edify your expert from that what's in it for them, because you want to see that customer how there is a value to the call. We want to serve them. Now, how do you edify? Remembering what's in it for them. Here's some examples of things that you could use. Remember to be comfortable, have that conversation with the friend in the same way that you would do with your best friend. Right? Don't see them as a sales object. So in a comfortable way, you might just say, my friend's actually been working with this for a while, and she can probably help give you more insight. I'd love you to hear her story. Right? My friend experienced the same challenges you describe, and he'd actually be a great person to share how it helped with him, and if he actually did anything special with the product to get the outcome he was looking for. So you're giving a reason there, we don't know, did that person actually use that product differently, so therefore there would be potentially a value to getting on there, and that person has had the same challenge that the person is that you're sharing with. Now, if you've got someone who's looking at the business side of it, it might be a relational point that makes sense to them. Maybe, one of my team she's actually got 9 kids, and she found ways to actually weave this business into her week. She could certainly help you decide if it's something you want to try. I mean, you may decide it's not for you. I think it's important to remember that, again, there's a value, right? There's a value to her exploring it with someone who's in the same situation as she is, many varieties of what that looks like. And at the end of it, they become more educated in what they would have to go through to be part of this business if they wanted to be successful. What are the pitfalls or the challenges for them? And that the opportunity to understand that once they've been educated, they get to make that decision, which may also be, no, it's not for me. So if you don't explore and have that conversation, how do you know that? And then the fourth option might be, coming from a personal perspective for all of us, remembering we don't all have the same health issues, so we can't really talk specifically to somebody else's health issue if it's not our position. I've seen lots of personal benefits with Redox, but it'd be really interesting and valuable probably to talk to somebody who's using the same medication as you are, because I certainly don't have blood sugar issues. I know that in the inviting stage, sometimes I will actually propose the notion that there will be somebody for them to talk to, that there is a value service as to why I would invite them to the three-way call. I will use this sometimes if and it isn't necessarily somewhere I want to have that direct call, like would you do a call with this person for this reason. So in setting up the three-way follow-up, because they're going to look at some kind of material that I'm sending them, I might actually weave into the conversation, I've got a friend who has the same challenges as you. I might just see if they're available for a couple of minutes to talk about how they use the product. Or you mentioned that you've only got a couple of days a week to do this, and I do actually have one of my group who was in the same situation. I might see if they're available to kind of talk about how they position this and how they help to make it successful for themselves in just 2 days. Or I might be, you mentioned that you've never had success and you've been in a lot of other network marketing companies. I actually have a couple of friends who are like that, who felt the same way. I might see if one of them might be available for 5 minutes when we get back on the call. So I might see if they could take 5 minutes to chat with you. So I'm kind of dialing down the purpose of having somebody on the call to take away that fear, oh, I'm going to get into a room and not be able to get out of it. If I do that indirect setup, right, the rules of the game for when we get on the call are slightly different than if you actually have already established that they're going to be meeting someone. So I would quickly start the call. And I would say something like, "Hi Jane, it's Carolyn. But before we chat about that video that I sent you, I mentioned I might reach out to see if John could share how," and I would talk about, it could be how he used the product for his shoulder tear, or it might be he used the product for faster running times, or it might be how he's building this business whilst he travels every week. John's only got a couple of minutes, but I wanted to let him connect first, and then he's just to share his story with you. I thought it would be valuable, and then he's going to jump off and you and I can talk about what you thought was interesting about the material. John, this is Jane. Jane, this is John. And then I would switch over and let them take over the call. Now, it's slightly different if you actually have an agreement. If they know in advance that there's going to be somebody that you're going to introduce them to, what do? You have different roles depending upon who you are, right? Obviously, you are B. You are the bridge between these people in that conversation. And you are like the host, right, at the party. You're going to introduce people and get them to have a fun time talking. So the facts that help start the conversation would be all those things that we covered in things like Lord, or form. So things like hobbies and location and family and work and aspirations. So I would say something like, Jane, I want you to meet Sarah. Sarah, and I'm setting up Sarah, who is the expert. Sarah actually lives in Atlanta. She's a busy mum with 2 kids. She also happens to work part-time in a dental office. She's become a really good friend. She's super smart and caring and has been successfully building her ASEA business around her family and work schedule. She's got a lot going on, but she has actually kindly offered just to take a few minutes to share her experience. Then you move over. Now, what have I done there? All right, I've kind of set who she is. I've made some connections, as you'll see, to this woman, because this is the basis of why I've asked Sarah to talk to her. Now, as B, your next role would be, once you've got everybody on this call, to introduce C, the customer, to the expert. Now, Sarah, I want you to meet Jane. Jane and I actually connected on Facebook in a gardening group, although Jane actually loves kickboxing, but she's recently injured her ankle. Jane actually teaches high school in Tampa, Florida, but she has 3 kids, and she's kind of thinking she'd love to stop teaching and work from home so she can have more time with her children. So she's been taking a look at how ASEA might make that possible. Now, what have I done? What I've done here is that I have given Sarah an opportunity to make friendship connections at the beginning of the call. Right? I've told her where I met Jane. I've told her what Jane's interests are to some extent. I've hinted in there that, there's a product possibility of a conversation here as well, because she's got an ankle injury, so it's not just a business conversation. I've talked about what Jane is so that she could ask her questions about what she does in her work, connected them with the kids, the reason why she is looking at the business. So I've actually primed the pump for Sarah to start to make friends with Jane and get that comfortable ground connection before we actually go into talking about things. My next role as B would be to say, I'm really excited for both of you to connect. Sarah, the expert, I'm going to actually mute out my line and let you 2 talk. All right. Now, if you're more skilled and experienced as an expert, you would also know what the goal is going to be. I mean, that is still important even if someone's not so skilled, but if you're pretty brand new to doing 3-ways, your goal really will be just to share your experience and point them to a tool. If you become very much more experienced in that, then you would want to make sure that you're trying to drive the conversation in a skillful manner. Now, what is your role once you've passed it over to the expert? Your role is to remain silent. I think this is probably the hardest skill that most people have. And no matter how much as you listen to that conversation between the expert and the customer, what happens very often is we hear things that aren't said, and we hear things that are said, and we might be kind of twitching about what's said or itching to make a comment about what's not said, as something's bypassed. I would tell you, you must trust the process. The conversation cannot include you. All right, this is a relationship, and it's really important that we protect that relationship. So you are going to have moments when you think that your expert didn't do what you thought that they should do, but you absolutely cannot jump in there. Now, if you interrupt that three-way, and this is what we see with people who are not simply unskilled or very new to this, but we actually see this even with skilled people who should know better, who interrupt, right? But if you interrupt a three-way conversation, it's no different than walking up to two people and interrupting a private conversation, right? You're going to break the thread of that conversation. You're going to disrupt the relationship that's being built in that process. This is an evolution that goes on from the start of the call to the end of the call. And an expert who certainly knows what they're doing knows how to drive that conversation where they want it to go. And if you step in the middle and interrupt, and you unmute yourself and you say something, you disrupt that. And I know that lots of us who are super experienced at doing these things can all tell you we've had times when people have jumped in, they've disrupted the conversation, and then it's actually been impossible because they've driven the conversation somewhere else, that it's been impossible to actually get back on track to where we wanted to go to, or they've brought in another dynamic that really kind of changes and disrupts how we wanted to deliver the information. So it's really important to make sure that you just leave it to the expert and trust the process. I just want to reference Zoom because nowadays so many people are doing Zoom shares and not simply on phone calls. And one of the things that I think is that because we all see each other, there is this tendency that comes about because we see facial expressions that we kind of think of this as being around a coffee table, right? And that we're all part of this conversation, and we are not. All right, so during the call, the other thing that happens is that during the call, whether it's on the phone or even on the Zoom, you may find that C, the client, is actually going to reveal health things about themselves to A that you don't know. And one of the great tendencies is, it could be an example where they suddenly say something about their knee problem and they've got to now have an operation. And maybe just last week you helped somebody with that same thing, and you're dying to jump in and tell them how your experience because you were able to solve a problem for someone. All right, do not unmute. There is no point in a conversation where you get to unmute unless that expert specifically asks you to unmute and say something. Your role as the B and the builder in this piece, the associate, is to sit there and to listen very carefully, no matter how experienced you are, to take detailed notes about the conversation and understand where the conversation is going. Pay attention, because you might have thought that it was a product conversation, and now suddenly you're hearing that they've opened up a conversation about the fact that this person really would love to have a big business, and it wasn't a place that you managed to take them. So listen carefully. Listen carefully also to the resources that are being recommended for your customer by the expert, because it's your job to know what the next step is and to be clear with what that next step is. So again, if you have a burning desire to share more information than they heard on the call, find another follow-up call to do that in. Don't do it at the end of this one, and I'll talk about why. Now, if you're asked a question by the expert and you're actually invited to share something during the call because there's a purpose, in other words, you're being a validator for something that they've now shared because there may be a reason that we feel that that person, especially if they're your friend, might actually accept a little bit of validation from you as credibility piece. All right, your goal is to unmute, is to share what you've been asked to share. Don't start taking over the call. All right, don't start adding more things to it. Do what you're asked to do, and then be respectful and just indicate when you've finished and step off the call and just mute yourself out again. Now, wrapping up the call, this is when you're going to be passed back the call. You as the bridge are going to have that call passed back to you. Your advisor is going to transition. They're going to give some directions to you as B as to what the next step should be. And there's always going to be pointing to a tool with a follow-up appointment, some kind of thing. It could be resources, webinars, recommendations of somebody else that that person thinks would be important for them to have a conversation with. Or maybe it's an agreement to get that customer account set up because it's a successful conclusion. All right, your task is simply at that point when they say that they're finished and they're passing you back to the call, then you can unmute and you simply say thank you very much to everybody for their time. You can allude to the fact with your customer that you're going to send the information that has been discussed, and look for that in an email, or I'll text that to you in a minute. All right, or if you're setting up another call, you might then say to advisor A, thanks so much, everybody, I really appreciate it. I know, Jane, you're going to step off the call, and Susie, let's just hang on for a second and let's book our next follow-up appointment with whatever. All right, so once you've done that follow-up appointment, get off the call, end the call. Don't fall into wanting to start to tell them additional information. You know, there's always things that are not going to be said during the calls that we always feel like, well, if they just knew this little piece of information, or if they just heard this story, or I could share that testimony, you know, that just happened to me yesterday. You know, if there were things that weren't said and you wanted to contribute, I'm going to leave you with one piece of advice. Please make sure that you understand that the advisor or expert designs the journey of this conversation. Right? There is an end goal that we're all trying to achieve, which has been agreed with you, the purpose of the call. There are things that we need to reveal and have conversations about as we go. And like a journey from A to B, we're going to maneuver our way to that end point, and we're going to be listening. So we might take what feel like diversions because we've heard something that's come up in the call, but our goal is to know exactly where we're intending to be and how to maneuver it that way. So I want to make you very conscious of the fact that this was an experience that they went through. Right? And particularly if during this there was some deep emotional connection over something about that person's life. And you felt like, gosh, you know, I really wanted them to see the scientific studies on this, that, and the other. It would have made a difference to them. And you're particularly the type of person who loves the science, so you think that that's important, that we just give this extra little piece. Just know that you can very easily undo where they're at and the work of the call, right? Because this is an evolution to a growth and a birthing, so to speak. So please just hold off on those things. Don't add and throw in your extra things. Just leave it where it is. Let it percolate as it stands. You can always have another follow-up call with your client to provide something else, and there's a great opportunity now to be able to have a conversation, because you can circuit back to them in a few days and say, you know what, you mentioned so-and-so on the call, and I thought about the fact that I hadn't shared so-and-so with you. Is that something you'd like to look at? So the overall thing is, be willing, as hard as it is, especially when you're new to this, to trust the process and enjoy the power of three-way calls, because this is the most powerful tool that we have, that validation piece in engaging someone to be able to bring them to a place that on our own is never going to be successful. I will tell you that even on the medical board, even with a naturopathic piece, I know for definite that if I open the conversation with somebody and I'm in a situation where I'm not able to navigate and use the tools because they see me as the doctor and they want to discuss it on the spot, I can tell you that that is never going to be the long-term successful client that I have, because they haven't had validation from someone else. All right, I hope that helps you, and I appreciate everyone's time.